Giving football the game it deserves is the dream, and to play my part, I work as a game designer for goals. In this video series, I'll be bringing you guys in our gameplay design discussions, where you'll be able to keep up with our progress while also having your say in the comments. To be even more involved, don't forget to follow the goals socials and joining the community Discord. All of those links will be in the description of the video and the pinned comment. So it begins. The series that I've been alluding to for the past few weeks is finally here. So again, let me know down below what your thoughts are. Now, if you've been following me for the last few years, it should come to no surprise that the first topic that I bring to you guys is passing and how we want to implement it in goals. So in regards to passing in this video, we can expect how we came about our conclusions and why we didn't want to go with other options that might be more obvious at face value. Jumping straight into it, first things first, in goals, passing will be one of the 6 main player attributes. The substats for passing, which of course are always things that are subject to change, both in terms of what comprises them, but also their names, will be the ground pass, through balls, lofted pass, crossing, and free kick accuracy, with each of these substats obviously having a different weight in terms of how much they affect the overall passing stat of a player. And before we jump into the really exciting part, which is showing you guys how we plan to differentiate between, for example, a 99 rated ground pass and a 1 rated ground pass, is that we will not be having passing be manual in goals. And I know this might be a big disappointment because a lot of people have always believed that making manual passing in a football game would solve all the problems that go alongside assisted passing, but we do not believe that manual passing goes hand in hand with what would be a fast-paced video game that we aim to create. There are arguments for both sides, but mainly we believe that having manual passing would be forcing the users to both power up a pass to perfection every single time, but also having the pass go in the exact aim that the left analog on a controller is aiming. In general, this slows down the game a lot, and you could argue that it's worth doing so because of the mechanical skill gap it adds, but to us, it isn't, because like I said, it does slow the game down a lot, but more importantly, we don't believe that everything that is a skill in real life has to and can be directly translated onto a controller. After all, this is a video game, and sometimes you have to embrace the limitations of trying to recreate what players do on the field on a controller. This is one of those times. In real life, it is absolutely possible that someone with better passing will be able to naturally put the correct weight on a pass and aim it better. But we have to ask ourselves the question, is it worth doing all that when all you have to recreate that exact skill is a controller with a left analog stick and a button that you can press and hold at different times? On a controller, the tiniest of movements on your analog stick would then reflect a massive change in aim, and the tiniest differences between how long you press and hold a button would result in massive changes in how much power a pass has. So what we would rather do is have the stat of the player dictate some of that, and the key word is some. So let me explain. The way we intend it to work is not going to be something that you may not already be used to if you've played football games in the past. So pressing the pass button will lead to you performing a pass, and holding it longer does not necessarily mean more power. Think of the power in a pass alongside with the aim being the way your tool to signal to the game who you want the receiver to be. Now imagine a situation where you have the ball and you have 2 teammates in front of you, teammate 1 and teammate 2. Now in this situation, it might feel like with our design that how much power you put on a pass generates more power, but really it's all about dictating who you want the receiver to be. So in this situation, if you were to simply tap the pass button, well then you would be telling the game, all right, I want the pass to go to teammate number 1. If you would want that pass instead to go to teammate number 2, you would have to power up that pass a little bit more, of course, assuming the aim is correct in this decision. And that would be your way of telling, okay, game, I want to pass to teammate number 2. So in this situation, power would allow you in the same direction to differentiate between, okay, I want to pass to teammate number 2 as opposed to teammate number 1 if you were to put more power on a pass. And so to show you that pressing the pass button longer does not necessarily equal more power and more distance on a pass, let me show you this example. If we were to pretend that teammate number 1 didn't even exist in this situation, all of a sudden we are left with this, a situation where the only person within the line of sight of the passer is teammate number 2. And now in this case, tapping the button would be more than enough for you to be able to tell the game, okay, I want the pass to go to teammate number 2. And so you can see that previously a tap of the button wouldn't have been enough because previously we had teammate number 1 standing in the way. So that's to kind of show you guys how we intend that to work, and how power is not necessarily, okay, the more you press and hold the pass button, the more power a pass will have. No, it's more so to help you differentiate alongside aim who you want the receiver to be. Of course, we plan to have limits because with this logic alone, in theory, you could tap the pass button and be able to reach a teammate on the whole other side of the pitch in instances where there happens to be no one else in the way. Now, in those instances, we want it to feel natural. We want it to make it logical to where, okay, that point, you're out of my vision, you're out of my minimum vision that a tap would give you, right? And so now you have to power up to increase said vision and be like, now I want to pass to this guy. So of course, there is going to have to be some sort of limit, otherwise you could have crazy edge case scenarios. Now, aim is something that we can be a little bit more harsh on because, for example, if we assume that our teammate number 1 is close enough to where all we have to do is tap the button so long as we aim in the right direction, well then we know we have to aim correctly. But what if you didn't aim correctly? Well, that's something that we are going to iterate on, and we are going to decide there's going to have to be some sort of point at which we say, I'm sorry, you just didn't aim correctly. But as of now, we know that if we aim relatively well enough with a simple tap of the button, if teammate 1 is close enough, that's enough for you to signal, I want this to be the receiver. The game, based off the player stat, will generate the pass, and it will assist the pass in this direction. However, what happens if your aim was off? Let's just say that, for example, you didn't pass in a straight line like this. Perhaps you messed up, and for whatever reason, you passed maybe like this. Well, at this point, even if you generated the right amount of power, at a certain point, we're going to have to be like, I'm sorry, you didn't do it well enough, and the pass will literally be played manually in this direction relative to your aim and power, and so it will almost feel like you passed into nothing. It's harsh, but that's how we intend to draw the line between getting the best of both worlds in terms of having someone aim relatively well manually, but also giving you the assistance in terms of the power that you generate on the pass. And I think this is the best mix to complement the style of game that we want to create, and that is one that is really fast-paced end to end. So hopefully this gives you a general idea of what we mean by assisted passing, where we want you as the user to use both the analog and passing button alongside with how long you hold the passing button to tell the game who you want the receiver to be. Now, the passing trajectory and power will depend on the type of pass that you choose, because of course there's going to be many different types of passes, and how good of a passer the player you are currently using is, which brings us to the next section of the video. And this is arguably the most exciting part, because our challenge is to make a player with a higher passing stat be way better than a player with a really low passing stat, all the while not messing with the skill gap of the game, because of course our priority is, while the best players will be the best, you as the users have to be able to use them. A player with really good passing is merely a weapon in your arsenal, if you will, and you have to use it properly because nobody is coming to save you. So as previously mentioned, aim and power will aid you in telling the game who you want the receiver to be, but the type of pass you want to perform will depend on the situation. And you have to choose wisely, because each type of pass will of course behave differently, as you can imagine, not only in terms of their trajectory, but also in how we will decide the passing stat to determine their outcome. For example, if we look at a simple ground pass, this is a type of pass that is aimed to be played in a straight line from the passer to the receiver. And at face value, you might think, okay, a passer with a high passing stat will be more accurate than a player with a low passing stat. Meaning that if this were to be a player with 99 passing, the trajectory would always look like this. However, if this was a player with maybe 1 passing, he would be more likely to misplace the pass and maybe pass it this way, even though you were aiming in this direction, or passing this way, and anywhere along these 2 points. At face value, you might think, okay, a player with a high passing stat should be more accurate than a player with a low passing stat. And while that makes sense, in practice, you risk edge cases in a video game where a bad passer may actually be better than a good one. So let me explain. Let's take the same exact pass, but put an opponent, an enemy opponent, in the way. Straight in the same trajectory. If we do follow the logic that a good passer will be more accurate, performing a ground pass in this situation will lead to a consistently accurate trajectory from the passer to the receiver. And if there's someone in the way, the defender will ironically have an easier time to intercept this ball than if the pass was performed by a poor passer, because the poor passer would be more susceptible to dispersion, meaning the pass trajectory might look something like this, it might look something like this, and you might say that's not a problem because if it looks like that, the receiver would not be able to get it because he's right here and the pass would end up either there or there. But at the same time, he might still be able to lock on. And at the very least, it's also going to make it very hard for the defender to read the pass. Our first problem with this is that, number one, is there not a way to create a difference between a good passer and a bad passer without random dispersion that, although does in a way punish bad passers, it does add to the inconsistency and unpredictability of an element of a game that would essentially be RNG. And it makes it hard for users to predict what will actually happen. But most importantly, like I just said, all of a sudden, the good passer is going to be consistently punished more than the bad passer. Now, if I were to die on the hill that I need dispersion, I could then say, well, if you are performing this pass with a 99 rated passer, well then I, as the game, will just make it so that my pass will avoid the defender in some way, shape, or form, alongside having the receiver lock on. But we're not really a fan of that, because just because you have a 99 rated passer doesn't mean that it should trump your ability as a user to make the correct decision. We really think it's important to have consistent, predictable outcomes so that both the offensive and defensive users can battle it out amongst themselves through the decision making. The players on the field and the stats that they have are merely tools for you to battle out in whatever way you think is fit. So that's why when it comes to ground passing, and remember, this does not include other types of passes, we don't plan on having dispersion. So while that means someone with a high passing stat will be just as accurate as someone with a low passing stat, it doesn't mean they'll be able to generate the same weight and power on the ball. So as you may have guessed, that's where we want the difference to be felt. We want a player with a higher passing stat to be able to generate the contextually appropriate optimal amount of power for a pass. And this feeling should amplify the larger the distance of a pass is, because at the end of the day, they are professional athletes and every user should be able to fall back on a 1 meter pass. So in this scenario, if this was a 99 rated passer, you could imagine this pass be just as accurate as if it was a 1 rated passer. However, there's good weight on the ball, and this defender running in this direction would never be able to even threaten to cut this passing lane. However, on the flip side, if this was a not 1 rated passer, perhaps now the pace on the ball is low enough to where I need to think twice before someone even at this distance is making their way before I even decide to make this pass. It's just that sort of decision making that goes on. And of course, like I said, this will amplify the larger the distances. And it kind of makes sense because the best passers can pull off passes across horizontally up the field, which are typically more dangerous because they put the right weight on the ball, and thus they are at a low risk of getting intercepted, whereas a poor passer will perform the same pass and more often than not have it intercepted because it's slow, it's easy to read. I think our favorite aspect about this route is that it allows for the user decision making to remain the king of everything, the ultimate decider between every scenario. So regardless of who makes a pass, if a lane is cut, the ball will always be intercepted, but at the same time, we feel there is an advantage and it can scale to having a player with a high passing stat relative to someone with a low passing stat, as they'll be able to pull off crispier passes from larger distances, thereby forcing opponents to be sharper defensively if they want to intercept a pass from that player. Now, if you're worried that isn't enough, don't worry, we have more ways to make the ground passing stat matter. For example, the second thing that the ground passing stat will influence is the driven pass. Now, this is a pass that is supposed to be really fast, and so everyone's driven pass will be really, really fast, much faster than any normal ground pass, but in this case, we do plan to add dispersion. The reason for that is that this is a type of pass that is so fast that the same problems do not arise once dispersion is a thing. That's because even if a bad passer can theoretically pass away from a potential interception, the pass is so fast that it allows us to limit the amount of dispersion. You need less dispersion to make more of an impact. For example, if we assume this is the trajectory of a perfect driven pass, if this was a ground pass, the amount of dispersion needed, because a ground pass is naturally slower, for this person to not be able to receive it might look something like this. You would need a large distance because a ground pass is naturally slower. So if the dispersion was only this much, the receiver could easily lock on and receive a bad pass regardless. However, the driven pass is a much quicker pass. Thus, only a dispersion of this much would be enough to be like, sorry, it was not a good driven pass. The receiver will not have the time to trap it. And so it's also a small enough dispersion to where if there is a teammate, or sorry, an opponent in the way, he would also not be as much in a disadvantaged position against players with high dispersion. And even if he was, this guy is not going to trap it. It allows us the flexibility to deal with it. And so for us, dispersion in this situation is not a problem. And now we move on to through balls, a moment of silence for our engineers who might hate me, but hopefully we can figure this one out. There will not be dispersion also for through balls, and let me explain to you the reason. As you may have guessed by now, it is really important for us to reward good defensive positioning when trying to intercept a pass. That's why oftentimes dispersion is a little bit of an enemy, but it also depends on what axis are you performing this dispersion. If you vary the trajectory of a pass either too much on one side or this side, now you make it really hard for both the passer and the defender to be like, where is the trajectory of this pass gonna go? However, if we can always make the trajectory of the ball consistent, we not only allow the offensive user to become a great passer by seeing the passing lanes first, we also allow the defensive user a fair opportunity to see them as well as position themselves accordingly. So again, through balls on the ground will not have dispersion in the way you'd imagine. That way, if you know one is coming, like in the drawing above, you always know that this is a trajectory of a through ball relative to a player in this position moving this direction. You can always position yourself accordingly. Everyone has a chance. And so that solves a major design issue from the perspective of the user defending the through ball. But how do we make it so someone with better through ball stats will feel better? And that's where dispersion on a different axis will occur. So then the pink area, which is greatly exaggerated to make a point of the drawing, would then indicate the dispersion from the perfect pass being right here, because this is the place where the ball would end up the moment the runner is running in this direction. He meets the ball in this place without having to alter that direction. He meets it in a way where he can take his first touch on the run again without altering direction. So in this case, any pass that doesn't end up there the moment the runner would be here is either overhit or underhit, or maybe we make it only overhit, or maybe we make it only underhit. These are things that, you know, are going to be dependent on context and on iterations and what we decide to do. But ultimately, you can see that it'll only always be on this axis. How big we make it, maybe we only make it this big, maybe we make it bigger, probably not bigger, but you get the point. This is just to draw and emphasize what the direction is. How we balance it is completely up for grabs. So if we think of an example where in this situation you perform the through ball and this would have been the ideal pass ending point relative to this runner's running direction indicated by the blue line, well, let's assume you perform this through ball with someone very bad at through balls and he overhits it. X marks the spot where the ball actually is the moment this player would have been in line here, and recognizing it, the player thus to get the ball would have to alter his trajectory as shown by the red line to then meet the ball here. That punishes the user with a bad through ball in the sense that it slows him down, but it never changes this trajectory to make sure that if someone were to intercept or stand here in the right place, regardless of who is performing the through ball, it can easily be intercepted, making the center point of the game always user decision making. And the reason we really like this is because, again, you guessed it, I've said this many times, but the defensive user doesn't get unnecessarily penalized for positioning himself correctly. While at the same time, it creates a massive advantage to having a good passer because they'd be able to have the runner receive the ball ideally in the right space without having to alter their run and thus lose their momentum. Now, like with ground passes, this will be felt a lot more over large distances than shorter ones. This is important to avoid simple, wide open through balls to be unnecessarily difficult, because we understand how frustrating that might feel. And iteration will be super important here to find the right balance, where as usual, context matters. Now, because you can't control the trajectory of the through ball in terms of how far ahead, because we want the through ball to always be played arbitrarily in the same amount of distance ahead of the running direction of the receiver, again, to make it predictable for both parties, you do need a way to pass further along than the same normal arbitrary distance, be it 2 meters, 5 meters, or whatever we end up making that be. And to do that, we need a different type of through ball. This will be particularly useful in edge cases where perhaps there is a ton of space ahead and it's worth to pass it into that space. For that reason, we want to add a second variation of the through ball. For now, we can consider it a threaded through ball, if you will. And the logic does not change. It is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is the aiming point, how far ahead. And for today, the only pass left to explain for now is the lofted pass, and things like crossing will be for another day, but the lofted pass can be considered the elevated version of a ground pass. So like with the ground pass, we envision the speed being a differentiator between a good lofted passer and a bad one, but unlike the ground pass, we do like the idea of adding dispersion. So if the perfect lofted pass in this case scenario can be seen from the black arrow in a straight line, perhaps someone with relatively good lofted passes will be susceptible to dispersion as shown from the 2 arrows. So he might pass it anywhere between here and here. However, someone with really bad lofted passes might be susceptible to even more dispersion. So his range would be from anywhere here to here. Again, these are just rough estimates, but the idea stands. Here, we don't figure it is a problem because the ball is played in the air and it doesn't present the same design concerns as other passes. So in this case, we don't really see the issue with dispersion being applied. In fact, we think it makes much more sense because regardless of someone being here, the lofted pass is going to go over them. Which brings us to the end of this video, where we have successfully covered the basic approach that we intend to take with passing. Our target is clear. We want to make stats matter, but making your decisions be the ultimate decider between a good outcome and a bad outcome in every situation. Of course, all of it will be dependent on the cards you're dealt with. The cards being, what user do you have? What player do you have? Does he have high stats, low stat? And then you're going to have to make the right decision accordingly. But so long as everything is transparent, so long as everything is consistent and clear, you should be able to make the right choices without the game having to come over and save you. Again, be sure to share your thoughts down below and follow all the Goals socials and Discord, because anything you mention here, be it questions or comments, will likely be addressed through content in the official Goals channels. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.